The Black Hawk didn't ask permission to land on the Millbrook High football field. It just came down, shredding the homecoming banner and flattening the marching band's folding chairs into scrap metal. 6 armed men were through the front doors in under 90 seconds, and every single one of them was asking for a teacher who, according to the front office, did not exist. 4 hours earlier, Rachel Coleman had been sitting in the back corner of the teacher's lounge, correcting a stack of freshman biology quizzes with a red pen that had almost run dry. Nobody in that building had the faintest idea what was coming. Nobody ever did. And that was exactly how Rachel had arranged her entire life to be. She was 36, though the fine lines at the corners of her eyes made people guess older, and the careful stillness in the way she moved made people guess she was tired, or bored, or both. She had been substitute teaching at Millbrook High for a little over a year, floating between whatever classroom needed a warm body that day: biology on Monday, world history on Tuesday, sometimes gym duty when Coach Tripp called out sick, which was often. She had no permanent classroom, no name on a door, no photo in the yearbook staff section. She liked it that way. Substitutes were furniture. Furniture didn't get asked questions. "You're up in room 214 today," said the front office secretary Donna, sliding a manila folder across the counter without looking up from her computer screen. "Mrs. Albright's out again. Migraines." "Understood," Rachel said. Her voice was quiet, even. The kind of even that came from years of practice rather than any natural calm. Donna glanced up then, just for a second, taking in the long sleeves of Rachel's cardigan, despite the fact that the building's air conditioning had been broken since August and the thermostat in the front office read 81 degrees. "You ever get hot in those things?" "I run cold," Rachel said, and Donna let it go. The way everyone at Millbrook High eventually let things go with her. Rachel Coleman was odd, quiet, competent enough to not warrant complaints, and forgettable enough that most of the staff couldn't have picked her out of a lineup by the end of the school year. That suited her fine. Room 214 smelled like dry erase markers and teenage boredom. 28 sophomores slouched into their seats as Rachel wrote the day's assignment on the board, in handwriting so neat it looked almost mechanical. In the second row, a boy named Tyler Briggs was already halfway through texting under his desk, and in the back, near the window, a girl named Madison Reyes was staring out at the parking lot with the particular blankness of someone who had stopped believing school mattered sometime around the 7th grade. "Chapter 9, Rachel said. "Cellular respiration. Read it, answer the questions at the end, and if you finish early, you can talk quietly. If you're loud, we're doing it in silence for the rest of the period." Nobody argued. There was something about the flatness of her tone that made teenagers, who could smell weakness from 3 hallways away, decide not to test her. At 10:40 during her planning period, Rachel sat alone in the teacher's lounge while Coach Denny Tripp and a cluster of younger teachers laughed over something on someone's phone. Tripp was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s who had once played Division II football and had never quite let anyone forget it. He glanced over at Rachel with the particular smirk he reserved for her. "Hey, Coleman, you coming to the staff mixer Friday? Or is that against the subcode too?" "I have plans," Rachel said, not looking up from her quizzes. "You always have plans," Tripp said, grinning at the room. "What is it this time? Alphabetizing your spice rack?" A few of the younger teachers laughed, not unkindly, just the easy laughter of people who found her strangeness mildly entertaining rather than threatening. Rachel let the comment slide past her the way she let all of them slide past her, like wind against a wall that had been built for exactly this purpose. She had learned a long time ago that reacting cost energy she couldn't spare, and that questions were the one thing in this life she absolutely could not afford. What none of them knew What none of them had ever bothered to ask was that 6 years earlier, Rachel Coleman had been Staff Sergeant Rachel Doyle, 18 Delta Special Operations Combat medic, attached to a 12-man Special Forces detachment that had spent 4 brutal years rotating through some of the worst terrain on the planet. What none of them knew was that her call sign, whispered with something close to reverence by the men who had served beside her, was Saint. Not because she prayed over the wounded, but because more than once, in rooms that smelled like copper and diesel and burning rubber, she had done things with her hands that no one without a medical degree, and very few people with one, should have been capable of doing. She had pulled 11 men back from the very edge of death across 4 deployments. She had lost 3 others despite doing everything right, and those were the ones that lived behind her eyes now, in the quiet moments, in the space between the end of a school day and the start of the next one. She had left the Army 5 years ago, changed her name back to her mother's maiden name, and built herself a life so small and so quiet that even the ghosts had trouble finding her in it. Substitute teaching had seemed almost like a joke when she'd first taken the job. No permanent post, no attachments, no one asking her to stay past 3 o'clock. It was, in its own strange way, the closest thing to peace she had found. She had exactly 3.5 hours left of being invisible, though she had no way of knowing that yet. At noon, a few miles northwest of Millbrook, a joint training exercise was underway at Camp Ashwood, a National Guard installation that occasionally hosted rotating Special Forces units running readiness drills before overseas deployment. It was routine. It was supposed to be routine. A live-fire close-quarters exercise inside a mock urban compound had gone sideways when a training round, improperly cleared from an old munitions cache buried decades earlier beneath the compound floor, detonated during a breach drill. Master Sergeant Ray Holt had been standing 4 feet from Sergeant First Class Danny Ruiz when the floor opened up beneath them. Ray had commanded plenty of chaos in his career, but nothing scrambled a man's instincts like watching one of his own go down on what was supposed to be a controlled exercise on American soil. Ruiz was 26 years old, a kid Ray had personally recruited and trained, a kid who called his mother every single Sunday without fail, and now he was lying in the dirt with a piece of jagged shrapnel buried in his abdomen and his blood pressure crashing by the second. "Medevac's 15 minutes out," someone was shouting. "Nearest trauma center's 40 minutes by ground." "He doesn't have 40 minutes, Ray snapped, his hands pressed hard against a wound that refused to stop weeping dark red through his fingers. "He doesn't have 15. It was the team's junior medic, barely out of the schoolhouse himself, who made the call that changed everything. "Sergeant, he needs someone who's done a blind abdominal packing before. This is above my training. We need—" "I know who we need," Ray said quietly, and something in his voice made the younger soldiers look up. He had already pulled his radio close to his mouth. "Get me air support and patch me through to base intel. I need a location on a name. Civilian name's Rachel Coleman, former call sign, Saint." It took the base's intelligence liaison less than 6 minutes to pull her current address and employer from federal records that were supposed to be sealed but never really were. Not for men who had served with her and never stopped keeping tabs. Millbrook High School, 41 miles southeast, well within flight range, and more importantly, the only place within a 15-minute radius with an open, flat field large enough and clear enough for an emergency landing. "She's not military anymore," the pilot said over the intercom, banking the aircraft hard east. "She's not even a nurse. She's a substitute teacher, Sergeant." "She's Saint," Ray said. "That's not a job title. That's who she is. Get us on the ground." At 1:52 p.m., Rachel Coleman was standing at the front of room 214, midway through explaining the electron transport chain to a room of mostly disinterested sophomores, when the windows began to rattle. It started as a low vibration in the floor, subtle enough that most of the students barely registered it beneath the drone of the air conditioning that had finally kicked back on. Rachel felt it differently. She felt it in her chest before her ears, caught up to it, a heavy, rhythmic thudding that resonated through the concrete foundation of the building and up through the soles of her shoes. Her hand froze on the whiteboard, marker still pressed against the surface. Every muscle in her body went taut, the old instinct flooding back so fast it stole the breath out of her lungs. That was not a civilian helicopter. That pitch, that percussion, that heavy displacement of air. She knew that sound the way other people knew their own heartbeat. "Miss Coleman?" Madison asked from the back row, frowning. "Is that a helicopter?" "Stay in your seats," Rachel said, and her voice had changed in a way none of them would be able to describe later, except to say it had gone very flat. Very fast. Outside, the Black Hawk descended over the football field in a controlled, violent rush, its rotor wash tearing the homecoming banner clean off the goalpost and sending it cartwheeling across the turf. It flared hard, ignoring the designated visitor parking lot entirely, and set down directly on the 50-yard line, close enough that the gymnasium windows shivered in their frames. Inside the front office, Principal Gerald Nash nearly dropped his coffee. "What in God's name is that?" Before Donna could answer, the front doors of the school were shoved open with enough force to bend the automatic sliding mechanism off its track. 6 men in full combat gear stormed into the lobby, boots pounding across polished linoleum, rifles slung but not drawn, moving with a controlled aggression that turned the entire front office into a frozen tableau of open mouths and wide eyes. "Where is Saint?" Master Sergeant Ray Holt's voice cracked across the lobby like a whip, silencing every murmur in the room. Behind him, 2 of his men were carrying a third between them, a young soldier whose combat uniform had been cut away to reveal a hastily packed but rapidly failing field dressing across his abdomen, his face a sickly shade of gray. Principal Nash stumbled out of his office, coffee forgotten. "This is a public high school. You cannot bring weapons into this building, and you certainly cannot land a military helicopter on school property without—" "I don't have time for your protocol, sir." Ray's voice was gravel and iron, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of the office staff. "I have a critically wounded soldier and I need Saint. Now." "We don't have a Saint here," Donna stammered. "This is a school. We have teachers. We have a nurse's aide who comes in on Tuesdays." "She's not a nurse," Ray snapped. "She's a combat medic, 5th Special Forces Group. Her civilian name is Rachel Coleman. Dispatch tracked her here 2 hours ago. Bring her out now or my sergeant dies in this lobby." Silence detonated across the front office. Coach Tripp, who had wandered in from the gym at the sound of the commotion, stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth working uselessly. "Coleman? The sub? You've got the wrong school. She can't be—" Down the hallway, room 214's door was already open. Rachel had told her students to stay put, and every teenage instinct in the room had immediately, gloriously, ignored her. 28 sophomores crowding into the doorway to see what the noise was. Rachel walked past them without a word, her steps quiet and unhurried on the tile, though her heart was hammering hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. She rounded the corner into the lobby, and the entire scene seemed to catch its breath at once. Ray Holt saw her first. His shoulders, tight with panic for the last 20 minutes, dropped half an inch. The barest fraction of relief crossing a face that hadn't relaxed since the explosion at Camp Ashwood. "Doc," he breathed. "Ray," Rachel said quietly. Her eyes went past him, straight to the young soldier on the litter, the gray pallor of his skin, the wet, dark stain spreading despite the pressure dressing. Her whole body shifted, some invisible switch flipping deep inside her, the box she had spent 5 years building around her old self cracking straight down the middle. This can't be her. Principal Nash's voice climbed half an octave. She's a substitute teacher. She corrects quizzes. She doesn't even have a classroom of her own. Sir, with respect, Ray said, not even glancing at him. Shut your mouth or get out of my way. Rachel was already moving. Bring him into the nurse's office, she said, and the flat, quiet, substitute teacher voice was gone entirely, replaced by something sharp enough to cut glass. Now, clear the hallway. Coach Tripp, still frozen, found his voice. You can't just... She doesn't have a medical license. This is completely against every... Get out of the way, Coach, Rachel said, not breaking stride. Or I will have Sergeant Kessler move you myself. One of the men behind her, a broad-shouldered soldier with a fresh gash above his eyebrow, gave Tripp a look that made him step backward into the wall without further protest. The nurse's office at Millbrook High was a windowless 10 by 12 room, usually reserved for stomach aches and skinned knees, equipped with a cot, an ice pack drawer, and a first aid kit that had not been restocked since the previous administration. It was, in every practical sense, the worst possible place to perform emergency trauma surgery. It was also the only sterile-ish flat surface within 100 yards, and Rachel had exactly one working set of hands and no time to wish for a better room. Lay him on the cot. Careful with that dressing. Don't pull it. She was already snapping on a pair of blue nitrile gloves from the wall dispenser, her fingers moving with a speed and precision that made the room's small crowd of onlookers, Principal Nash, Donna, 2 office aides, and a dozen students who had trailed the commotion down the hall against every rule of the building, fall utterly silent. Status, Rachel said, cutting away the field dressing with a pair of trauma shears she'd pulled from a leg pocket that had never, to anyone's knowledge, held anything but tissues and hand sanitizer before that exact moment. Shrapnel entry, right lower quadrant, Ray reported, his voice steadying now that command had shifted to someone who knew what to do with it. We packed it in the field. He's lost a lot of blood. Pressure's been dropping since we loaded him. Rachel's hands found the wound, feeling the swollen, tender rigidity of the abdomen beneath her fingers, the classic sign of internal bleeding that had gone past what any pressure dressing could manage. Danny Ruiz's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, finding her face in the chaos. Doc? His voice was barely a whisper. That you? It's me, Danny. Her tone gentled for exactly 1 second, one small crack of warmth breaking through the ice, before hardening back into command. You held it together this long. I need you to hold on a little longer. His abdomen's rigid and distending, Rachel said, mostly to herself, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Internal hemorrhage, probably splenic or a mesenteric bleed. I can't fix that here. I need to get him stable enough to survive transport. She looked up sharply. I need whole blood. I need IV access. And I need something rigid enough to pack this wound and hold pressure until the flight medic gets a line in him. We've got O negative in the aircraft cooler, one of the soldiers said, already moving. Go. Now. Rachel turned to the terrified office aide hovering in the doorway. I need every clean towel or gauze pad in this building right now, and someone get me the largest bore IV catheter in that first aid cabinet. It won't be big enough, but it's what we've got. Principal Nash, pale and stammering, found something like his voice. Ms. Coleman, I need to understand what is happening in my school right now. This is a liability nightmare. If that boy dies in my nurse's office. He's not going to die in your nurse's office, Rachel said without looking at him, her hands already packing sterile gauze deep into the wound with a firm, practiced pressure that made Danny groan through gritted teeth. Hold his hand, Ray. Talk to him. Keep him with us. Ray Holt gripped his young sergeant's hand, leaning close. You hear that, Ruiz? Doc's got you. Same Doc who pulled Ferris out of that building in Kandahar with 2 working hands and a headlamp. You are in the best hands on this continent right now, so quit your whining and stay with me. Danny let out a wet, broken laugh that turned into a groan as Rachel worked. The IV catheter, comically small for the amount of fluid he needed, went into his forearm on the second try. Rachel's hands moving with a steadiness that seemed almost supernatural given the chaos surrounding her. Blood's here, the soldier said, breathless, shoving a small cooler bag through the door. Hang it high, run it fast. Rachel connected the line herself, watching the dark bag begin its slow drip into Danny's vein, her eyes flicking constantly between the wound, his face, and the faint rise and fall of his chest. Pressure check. 82/40, Ray reported, reading off the small portable monitor one of the soldiers had unpacked from a field kit. Climbing slowly. It's not enough, Rachel murmured. He needs a surgeon and an OR in the next 20 minutes, or that bleed is going to win no matter what I do in here. She looked up at the soldier nearest the door. Where's the medevac? 6 minutes out, ma'am. They diverted from the training exercise the second we called it in. Tell them to land on the field, not the parking lot. Tell them I need a trauma surgeon standing by at County General, not just an ER doc. Splenic injury, possible mesenteric tear, hemodynamically unstable. Go now. The soldier sprinted from the room, radio already pressed to his mouth, and Rachel turned her full attention back to Danny, both hands pressing firm, unyielding pressure against the packed wound while the blood bag emptied steadily into his arm. Stay with me, Danny, she said quietly, all the sharp command draining out of her voice and leaving something almost tender in its place. You've got a mother who calls every Sunday. You are not doing this to her today. Danny's eyes, fluttering weakly, found hers one more time, and something like a smile ghosted across his gray lips. Knew you'd come, Doc, he whispered. Ray said you would. Ray talks too much, Rachel said, and for one strange, suspended second, in a room that smelled like hand sanitizer and blood instead of dust and diesel, it almost felt like 6 years hadn't passed at all. The second helicopter arrived 4 minutes later, a proper medevac bird with a flight medic and a stretcher crew who took one look at Rachel's field packing and IV placement and simply asked, "Who did this prep work?" I did, Rachel said, stepping back to let them take over, stripping off blood-soaked gloves with hands that had finally, now that the immediate crisis had passed, begun to tremble. The flight medic glanced at the tight, textbook-perfect packing, the properly secured IV line, the meticulous notation Rachel had scrawled on a torn piece of notebook paper detailing vitals, timing, and fluid volumes given. This isn't first aid kit work, he said slowly. No, Rachel agreed. It isn't. They loaded Danny Ruiz onto the stretcher and moved him at a dead run back toward the football field, where the second aircraft's rotors were already spinning up a fresh storm of dust and shredded grass. Rachel stood in the doorway of the nurse's office and watched them go, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, the adrenaline that had carried her through the last 20 minutes finally beginning to recede and leave something cold and shaking in its place. The nurse's office, and the hallway beyond it, was packed with people who had not moved a muscle through the entire ordeal. Principal Nash stood by the door, ashen. Coach Tripp had backed himself against a locker bank, arms crossed, staring at Rachel like he had never actually seen her before, which, in the truest sense, he never had. 28 sophomores from room 214, along with what looked like half the school's population who had heard the commotion, were crowded into the hallway in absolute silence. "Ms. Coleman," Nash said, finding his voice at last, though it came out smaller than he probably intended. "What exactly did I just watch happen in my nurse's office?" Rachel didn't answer right away. She was watching Ray Holt walk back through the front doors, having escorted his sergeant to the second aircraft, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent the last hour convinced he was going to lose someone he loved. "He's stable," Ray said, stopping in front of her. "Flight medic said your prep work bought him the time he needed. County General's got a trauma surgeon scrubbing in already." He paused, and something in his weathered face softened into an expression that looked almost like grief, or relief, or both at once. "You saved his life, Doc. Same as always." "I bought him time," Rachel said quietly. "The surgeon saves his life. You know that's not how any of us see it." Ray glanced around the crowded hallway, at the wide-eyed students and the pale-faced administrators, and something in his posture straightened, shifted into the particular formality of a man about to make something official. "Attention," he said, and his voice, though not loud, carried the unmistakable weight of command. The 4 remaining soldiers, who had been standing near the shattered front doors, snapped instantly to attention, boots clicking together in perfect unison. Ray turned to face Rachel directly, squared his shoulders, and raised his right hand to his brow in a crisp, deliberate salute. "Staff Sergeant Rachel Doyle," he said, loud enough to carry down the entire hallway. "It has been the honor of my career to serve alongside you. On behalf of every man you've ever pulled out of the dirt, thank you." The hallway, packed wall to wall with teenagers who had spent the last year mostly ignoring the quiet substitute teacher who floated between their classrooms, fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the distant fading thrum of the medevac helicopter climbing away toward County General. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She raised her hand and returned the salute, and for one brief, unguarded moment, something that looked very much like tears caught in the corner of her eyes before she blinked them away. "At ease, Ray," she said softly. Principal Nash cleared his throat, visibly struggling to reassemble whatever authority he still possessed. "Ms. Coleman, I think we need to discuss what just happened here. The district is going to have questions. Insurance is going to have questions. I don't even know what I'm supposed to put in the incident report. Put in that a school employee performed emergency first aid on an injured service member and stabilized him for transport," Rachel said, her voice returning to its usual quiet evenness, though something harder now ran underneath it. "That's what happened, Dr. Nash." "That is not what happened," Nash said, though his conviction had visibly drained out of him. "You clearly have training that has never once appeared on any application you've submitted to this district." "I was never asked," Rachel said simply. "The application asks if I have a valid teaching certification. It doesn't ask if I know how to pack an abdominal wound." Coach Tripp finally pushed off the locker bank, his face a strange mixture of shame and disbelief. "Coleman, He stopped, seemed to genuinely search for words for what might have been the first time in his adult life. "I called you the sub for a year. I made jokes." "You did," Rachel said, without malice, without heat, simply stating a fact. "It's fine, Coach. I preferred it that way." Ray Holt studied her for a long moment, the noise of the hallway slowly beginning to return around them as students started whispering to each other, phones already coming out to capture the wrecked football field and the departing soldiers. "You could still come back, you know," he said quietly, "just for her. We've got a slot open on the medical training cadre. Teaching, technically. Just a different kind of classroom." Rachel looked past him, out through the shattered front doors, toward the football field where the grass was flattened in a wide, perfect circle, the homecoming banner lying torn and half buried in the churned-up turf. She thought about Danny Ruiz's hand gripping Ray's, about the particular silence of a room where 28 sophomores had watched her stop being invisible in the span of 11 minutes. "Give me some time to think about it," she said. Ray nodded, understanding better than anyone in that hallway exactly what she meant. He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at her one more time. "For what it's worth, Doc, the Army's loss was this school's gain, whether they know it yet or not." He walked out through the broken doors, his 3 remaining soldiers falling into step behind him. And a few minutes later, the second wave of rotor wash tore across the wrecked football field one final time as their transport lifted off into the pale afternoon sky, banking north toward Camp Ashwood, leaving Millbrook High School standing in a silence it would not fully shake off for weeks. Danny Ruiz survived the surgery at County General, and 2 weeks later, a small, unofficial contingent of soldiers showed up at Millbrook High during lunch period, off-duty and out of uniform except for Ray Holt, who wore his dress uniform and stood a little straighter than the occasion strictly required. They found Rachel in the cafeteria, supervising a table of freshmen who had never once, in an entire year, bothered to learn her first name. Danny Ruiz walked in slowly, still favoring his right side, a fresh surgical scar hidden beneath his shirt, and when he saw her, he didn't say a word. He simply walked over, took her hand, and pressed his forehead briefly against hers, the way soldiers do when the words for what they mean haven't been invented yet. The entire cafeteria watched in absolute silence as a group of Special Forces soldiers, one of them freshly recovered from surgery, stood in line to shake the hand of the woman half the school had spent a year calling nothing more than the sub. Principal Nash never did figure out exactly what to write in the incident report. He eventually settled on the phrase, "unforeseen medical emergency, resolved favorably," which was, in its own quiet way, the truest thing anyone in that building said about Rachel Coleman all year. She kept substitute teaching for the rest of the semester, floating between classrooms exactly as she always had, though the long sleeves came off sometime in October, and nobody at Millbrook High ever called her the sub again. If Rachel's quiet courage and the unbreakable bond between soldiers moved you today, hit that like button and share her story with someone who needs a reminder that real heroes rarely announce themselves. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories of hidden strength and quiet sacrifice. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were sitting in that classroom the day the helicopter landed?